Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Innovating Innovation and How Data Science is Changing Innovation Management. My name is Mariana Ballinger here at Lux Research, and I will be moderating today's session with you. Okay, before we delve into today's webinar, I just wanted to briefly touch on the work that we do here at Lux Research. As we all know, making the right innovation decisions can mean the difference between a company thriving or failing. This is exactly where Lux Research can help. As you might be aware, Lux is a global leader of research and advisory services, helping companies just like yours drive growth through tech innovation. As you can see on this particular slide, our work is based on three main pillars: technical expertise, primary research, and advanced analytics. We are a unique partner with both technical expertise as well as business acumen, both of which, as I mentioned, are supported by advanced analytics. Now, as seen on, or as shown, I should say, on this slide, one of our main key differentiators at Lux Research that I would like to highlight is our technical pedigree. Our philosophy is that an understanding of the underlying technology is critical to making informed business decisions. That's why our team is made up of scientists and engineers, most of which have advanced degrees from top universities around the world. Our speaker for today's webinar will be Arij van Berkel. Arij oversees the global energy team at Lux Research. Arij and his team provide strategic insights in the landscape of energy supply to mobility, residences, and industry. Throughout today's webinar, you'll be able to ask any questions you might have on the questions box on your screen. And time permitting, we'll answer all the questions that we can. If your question does not get answered today, please don't hesitate to email your question to questions@luxresearchinc.com. And one of our team members here at Lux will get back to you as soon as possible. Also, just a note here that should you experience any difficulties with your audio, please use the global dial-in number, which is in your confirmation email in your inbox. Excellent, let's get started. At this point, I would like to introduce our very own Arij van Berkel.
Thank you, Mariana, for the introduction. And welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm very excited to share with you some of our further thinking about how the innovation management landscape is actually changing and how that's going to affect all of your jobs, at least assuming you're all in some way connected to innovation. So we've been presenting some of our thinking there on our executive summit in April in Boston. And since then, we've continued to do research into this next phase in innovation management. And when I say next phase, I mean we have experienced a number of evolutions of innovation management over time. And the latest evolution actually was the advent of open innovation, and we've seen everyone embrace that. But that's already about 20 years ago. So we're thinking it's now time for a next step in evolution, which really has to do with automation and the broad-scale use of data in new product development. So I'll explain why we think that, and I'll explain how you can prepare for that. Why we think that is actually, we've seen a large acceleration of innovation efforts with companies. And what you're seeing here is how innovation is growing faster, how the intensity of R&D in various industrial sectors is outgrowing revenue growth. In other words, companies are spending a bigger share of their revenues on innovation every year. And the only exception here is pharmaceuticals. You can see all other companies are growing faster. So it means also you are likely to get more scrutiny and more questions about where all of that money is going. And to show an example what it looks like, let's focus on automotive, right? Let's focus on a company like Volkswagen. So we've looked at their annual reports, and Volkswagen has been mentioning R&D and innovation in their annual report dating all the way back to 1965, but it's been modest until the mid-1990s, when you suddenly see a big rise in the number of times they mention innovation or research in the annual report, going from about 3 or 4 times in 1970, 2 of which are because it's the function title of one of the persons mentioned there, to about 200 times in 2015. So really, if you believe the annual reports, innovation has risen to prominence, right? It's really very important right now. But is it really? Are they also spending equivalent amounts? Well, we can look at that, and we can look at the spending on capital expenditure over time relative to sales, and the spending on R&D relative to sales. And what you can see is, following all of the doctrines of the day, where outsourcing is becoming more important and a lot of the production facilities are actually outsourced in the value chain, capital intensity has decreased from about 12% in its heyday to about 6% today. Whereas R&D intensity has increased from not being mentioned at all in the 1970s through about 3.8% in the 1990s to 6% today. And that's really what's happening, and it means that nowadays, and for the past 10 years already, the spending on R&D and innovation actually matches the spending on capital on production facilities at Volkswagen. And that means that also the kind of scrutiny that's applied to those spendings is getting equivalent, right? Where capital expenditure has a host of different ways of justifying and explaining why it is a good investment for the company, things like net present value, internal rate of return, all of those metrics. You now also are facing a challenge to have a similar, or at least equivalent, justification for the spending on innovation, because it is growing as important as the capital expenditure. And of course, there are results there. You can see how the product cycles have definitely accelerated as a result, presumably as a result of increased spending on innovation. So there's also a pressure to perform. You not only are required to justify the spending, you're also required to deliver. So what's going on? Why this trend? What is happening here? And what is the deeper reason behind this, right? And one of the reasons really is that innovation has now become an integral part of operations. And that means that you also need to be conscious of the fact that you are actually a part of operations. You're no longer just the fancy, future-oriented part of the organization. You're an integral part of operations as well. So we like to distinguish between 2 types of innovation. One is operational innovation, which is really what I was mentioning before, how you've become part of the operations. And this is about the need to launch new and updated products. If your company is not creating new products all the time, it will face a stiff competition and it will lose market share. So operational innovation is not optional. You have to succeed. It's an essential part of business operations. So, and it should be regarded as such because it also adds cost to your operations. Then we have the more classical idea of innovation, which is expansive innovation. And I'm sure it's also going to be expensive, but this is really about expanding, about enlarging the reach of your company. It is optional. It is actually competing with other types of investments that you could make. But the target is to expand your business, to venture out into new markets or to launch new products into existing markets. And what you want to do there is build a portfolio of options. So essentially, how your job is changing, where at the start of Open Innovation, we were all discussing about new ideas and how to get more and better ideas into the funnel and all that. And I'll be discussing the funnel in a little while. That really is, let's say, the traditional task of innovation. Finding new horizons for your company, new places to go. But then there is it's mentioned here as a new task. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a new task. It was always there, but it's much more prominent today, which is you are in a global innovation race, and that global innovation race is accelerating, and your company needs to be in the lead and needs to remain in the lead. and that's another task you have to take care of. So you're stretched between short and long-term goals. You're also stretched between taking risks in expensive innovation and being reliable and delivering in operational innovation. Right, so for operational innovation, you need to be efficient. You have efficiency metrics, you need to deliver on time, and you need to hopefully deliver at the lowest cost. You need to optimize for cost, and you want your innovation to be automated. You want data enablement. For expensive innovation, on the other hand, you have to deal with investment metrics. You need to convince your shareholders that you should hang on to the money, and they should let you invest the money into something adventurous rather than giving it back to the shareholders so that they can invest. So you need a high return on investment. You need to optimize your portfolio, and you need automation in market research and technology tracking. Where are your options? How do you find them? So if that's the case, how do you do that? Well, you've got the tools, right? There are so many tools that have been developed, and much of these are spin-offs from the open innovation thinking. You've got things like road mapping, you've got megatrends, you've got tech scouting. Most of you will have a corporate venturing arm right now in your company, or you'll be an LP in some other venture fund, right? You have stage gating. I'm pretty sure, I cannot do a show of hands here because we're in this virtual connection here, but I'm pretty sure if I did a show of hands on who's doing stage gating, I would see every one of you, right? Everyone has it. So if you've got all these tools, then why are we here? Why am I talking to you? Because I think these tools are very hard to use currently. And really, to make optimal use of them, you need to improve two essential elements there. You need to make them much more data enabled. You need objective data. You need not just the expert opinion of the people in your company. You need data from the outside that is verifiable. And then you need to integrate your tools. So who among you can safely say to me, can guarantee to me that if your roadmap is changing, that your stage gate criteria are automatically changing with it? Very few probably, because I haven't come across many companies, or any companies for that matter, that are doing that, right? But that's something you need to do, because we find many among you are cutting corners on the stage gating. And we have conversations where people will say, yeah, well, according to the stage gate criteria, we should cancel the project, but we know it's important. So the stage gate criteria must have been wrong. So we're still keeping the project alive, right? So that's not a good way to organize your processes if you're not going to take them seriously. You need to integrate them. So let's take a look. Data enablement and automation enablement on the one hand, and a fully integrated tool set on the other hand. What does it give us? Well, if you picture yourself not being that much data enabled and not being that much integrated, so you're probably in the lower left-hand corner, which I would call innovation management 1.0, which is still a very respectable profession. We should not underestimate the strides that have been made in developing innovation management in a trade of its own. That this really is something that you can be an expert in. But really, we should try and get to innovation management 2.0, which is highly data and automation enabled, and all of the tools are working flawlessly together in a very integrated way. How do you get there? One way is to focus on operational innovation. And really what I think will happen there is you'll be focusing a lot on efficiency. You'll be looking at R&D automation. You'll be looking at technologies like materials informatics, all sorts of computational tools that will make research itself much more automated. And that is a pathway to getting to innovation management 2.0. On the other hand, you can also focus on expansive innovation. And there you will want to focus on risk management. You will want to have as clear a picture of the environment you're innovating in as possible. Gather all the data, make sure you have one comprehensive and cohesive, but also coherent source of data, and use that to justify your decisions and act on them. And that will get you through innovation resource management. And we call it innovation resource management for a reason, because we think it is very similar to enterprise resource management. which is also about consolidating all of your data, making sure you're acting as a company on the same data, everyone. And this is about making sure you're acting as innovation management on the same data and the best available data about your environment. Of course, you actually should do both. You should be focusing on operational and expansive innovation and optimize for both, perhaps in different teams within your organization. And then you're kind of encircling innovation management 2.0. And I think that's your best way of getting there fastest. So if that's the framework, that's all very abstract, right? How do you start? What can you do now as you leave this webinar? Don't leave yet. As you leave this webinar, what are you going to do? Well, we asked 40 of your peers. And so let's take a look at things that are happening now and how there are clues for what you can start doing, right? And to take a look, let's take a look at various stages in the innovation funnel, right? So we're going to look at the front end, we're going to look at the middle, we're going to look at management and integration across the funnel, and we're going to not take a very close look at the validation stage. We also have research there, but in the interest of time, I will not focus so much on number 4. We'll just take a look at 1, 2, and 3. So let's take a look at the front end first. And what we found at the front end by interviewing your peers, we saw that artificial intelligence really is starting to impact ID generation, but the marketing technology scouting are still very traditional. And by traditional, I mean human-centric. And let me be clear there, I don't think it should ever not be human-centric anymore. It should be human-centric, however, data-enabled. So data should play an important role, maybe as important as human input, but you will never lose the human insights and the human decision-taking from the process. So for ID generation, right, there's quotes like, we've been surprised at how useful these tools have been to really look at intellectual property, for example. Also, there's someone telling us that right now those tools are still a barrier to creativity, but they believe a deep learning tool, so a better version of the current tools, will give you 80% of the analysis, and it will free up the people to think about the 1 or 2% where really creativity is really needed. On the other hand, if you look at market and tech scouting, we get quotes like, our customer-facing people really provide our input, and we have application and engineers at every major customer, right? So it's really eyes and ears at the customer, not a lot of data, or at least not a lot of explicit data gathering going on. And that's not entirely necessary, because if you look at market scouting, let's take a look at what Hyundai has been doing with Quid, right? Where they have been analyzing data sets, impacting 8 different themes like economy, public safety, you can read all of that, right? Governance, environment. And they've been categorizing 400 cities based on analyzing data sets on these 8 themes. And the reason they do it is to identify where can we introduce certain technologies, certain opportunities, like mobility opportunities, for example. What are the best places to introduce those? And we've looked at what Hyundai has been doing there, and we think that it's a brave effort. It's a good effort as well. It's struggling a little bit. It's still not extracting insights that easily, but these tools are advancing. So I think it's very smart for Hyundai to be dabbling with this and to try it, because they will need the experience, and in a year or two, these tools are going to be really useful for market and tech scouting. We move on to the second stage in the funnel, right? And that's really evaluating projects. So now you have some ideas, you have taken a first glance at them, now you're really going to do a deep dive, you're going to invest in them seriously, and you need to evaluate your projects. Also because, remember, your shareholders want to know if you're spending all of that money, which is now 6% in the case of Volkswagen of your revenue, if you're spending it properly. So really R&D automation is really starting to be embraced. So a great chunk of our effort is to digitally enable R&D tasks, and we're constantly asking what digital tools can help make research faster. So really on the efficiency side of things, you're really starting to embrace those tools, right? And I love this quote about people whose job is to just bring robotization, right? That's really automating, taking work out of the hands of people, robotization, automation, and sensors to the lab. On the other hand, evaluation, we get people telling us things like the machine learning is inside their heads, which means that either their employees are machines or they don't really employ machine learning. I think the latter. Or it is recommended, or just people who are just getting started and hope they can reinforce a little bit their workforce, where it's still human-centric, but maybe they're a bit more efficient if machines are recommending which papers to read out of 1,000. So again, mixed image here. I would say the operational branch is really going well, but the expansive branch, if you remember my picture, is going not so well yet. And just to show you a flavor of this operational innovation and how R&D automation is playing a role there, look at McCormick and IBM cooperating, looking at seasoning, and IBM building an algorithm which is optimizing a seasoning based on a database to be fit for purpose, to be novel, and to be appropriate for the society they're targeting. And that really sped up the development process by 70%. And it helped alleviate a shortage, a staffing shortage, essentially. And we think these tools have a very bright future. And we're looking at things like material informatics, ingredient informatics, and all of those informatics that are really going to be very impactful. If you look at decision-making and formal structure, if you look at how that is being impacted by our framework of integration and automation, you see that companies really struggle to implement innovation resource management. And that should actually not be surprising, because companies also struggled, if you remember, to implement enterprise resource management, right? And so apparently for one of the people we interviewed, it was a disaster to implement it from the start. And they had no choice but to go back to their old tool. I'm sure that sounds familiar to some of you. And there's only one of you that we interviewed, so the others should wonder what's happening there, right? I think the solution to this issue is that you also need to change your process. And that's essentially the lesson from enterprise resource management, is that you have to be willing to change your process if you're gonna allow automation to play a role in your process. So if you haven't changed your stage gate process in quite a while, like for example, 40 years, then you're probably in trouble. So think about that. And one of the companies who did change their process was Unilever, when trying to hire new staff, right? And they really changed their process and they automated the hiring process, not in the sense that they were automatically putting out offers to people, but at least they were selecting the people in a very automated fashion by using natural language processing to screen LinkedIn profiles, using artificial intelligence to analyze results from games they asked people to play online, and then using computer vision and voice recognition to analyze intonation, body language, and all that. And really the results were impressive because they increased acceptance rates on their offers from 65% to 80%. And they reduced hiring times from 4 months, imagine 4 months, to 4 weeks. Right, and we think those tools will be really impactful, but currently they will be marginally beneficial to R&D organizations. Right, so they can be really impactful in the hiring process, but we don't think you don't know who's knowledgeable, who's the expert in your area. So you'll probably end up hiring the same people, just doing it a bit more efficiently. So we'll skip digital tools for novel business models and new offerings for the sake of time. We have a lot of information there about how people are leveraging digital tools for new business models, but also for getting faster feedback on their products. But let's pause a little and look back at what we've been covering so far, right? We've looked at Volkswagen, we've looked at how innovation has risen to prominence, how that is also putting additional pressures on you to be better at innovation and to actually deliver more reliably and with a faster cadence. And we've distinguished between operational and expansive innovation, and we've mapped out two tools, two pathways to go to Innovation Management 2.0. We've looked at how you and your peers are trying to do that in the various stages of the innovation funnel. So now let's look up, let's look ahead. What is the bright future there? And how can you get there? Right? It's really time to reinvent your job. We're at that stage where 20 years after open innovation, we are now facing a new step in the evolution of innovation management. And to be part of that evolution, you really need to identify your operational innovation portfolio and set it apart from your expansive innovation portfolio. And then really relentlessly pursue efficiency for that. You also need to start implementing artificial intelligence in market and technology scouting to quantify risks and opportunities for your expansive innovation. So the part of your portfolio that's left must be your expensive innovation, or it must be useless and stop doing it. But if it's expensive innovation, really start looking at market and technology scouting and look at how you can enable data there. And finally, you need to start getting serious about innovation resource management. There are tools out there. We think none of those tools are really up to the task right now, but they won't be unless you instruct them how they can become up to the task. So you really have to start playing around with them and start formulating your strategy and how you would like to do innovation resource management. With that, I'll leave you for today. I thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to hand over back to Marianne to see if there are some questions already in our chat box. And remember, you can enter questions in the chat box, and we will get around to addressing them, even if we don't get around to it today.
Excellent, great. Thanks, Arij, for your presentation. Personally, I've certainly never thought about operational versus expansive innovation in the way that you just outlined. So thanks again for sharing your perspective with us today. Okay, we'll now be taking questions that you may have on the presentation. And as I mentioned earlier, please type these questions in the questions box that you have on your screen. And if your question will not be answered today, someone from Lux Research will be in touch with you after the webinar to address your question. Okay, let's have a look. All right, let's have a look at the first question that just came in. So firstly, a thanks to Arij for the presentation. And then this participant says that it is still not clear to them where to start. And where would you suggest that they get started with innovation resource management?
Right. So we've been looking everywhere basically for companies that are supplying innovation resource management. And there are many small boutique companies out there. I can mention a company like Bright Idea, for example, that are offering, let's say, process automation for your innovation processes. And like I said, they are probably not up to the task. They are nowhere near something like a monster like Salesforce or SAP that is nowadays used for enterprise resource management. But I think they're good starting points. At least they'll be relatively light to start, and try a few of those. Look at Bright Idea, look at some of their other competitors, and we can show you a couple of those in if you look at our report, Innovating Innovation, for example. You'll find a number of those. Just try them on one or two different projects you may have, so that you get a better awareness of what you want and what you don't want to do, essentially. And then after that, you should probably consider being more serious about it. And we find that most of the companies we talk to are building their own custom tools right now. So, and I think for now, that's the way forward, but be prepared to integrate those custom tools into emerging bigger providers of those software tools.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then here's another interesting one. They're referring to slide 6. And they specifically mentioning that we're showing all industries, most industries, but we're not showing pharmaceuticals. Let me know when you have that slide up.
Yeah, it's a long way up. I'm getting there.
And
people remembered so much the first part. Here it is.
And then
so we are showing pharmaceuticals, but it's the outlier, right?
Right, correct. And then the question here is, what is happening there? If you could comment on what is happening there. And the second part of that question, whether this could be potentially be an indicator of future trends for other industries. Right.
So that's a great question. I'm happy whoever is asking it because indeed pharmaceuticals, and we've been looking at that, right? I've skipped over it, perhaps hoping no one would notice, but pharmaceuticals is the one weird behaving sector here compared to the others. Everyone is increasing R&D expenditure relative to revenue growth, except pharmaceuticals, they're decreasing it. So what's going on there? Are they just a very different industry, or are they ahead of everyone else? And will everyone else soon start reversing that trend? And I think there's a bit to say for both hypotheses. So first of all, pharmaceuticals is a very particular industry. And one of the things we see happening there is that they are doing a lot of outsourcing. So if you look at R&D intensity per se, you could say that pharmaceuticals are now finding other ways of innovating. For example, outsourcing some of the typical R&D activities to other companies. Where, for example, if you want to shift to biologicals, typically you do that by either investing in a startup or outsourcing some of your activities to a startup. And that is not always registered as R&D intensity or R&D spending. So on the one hand, pharmaceuticals, I think, have hit a wall where further increase in innovation spending is no longer productive. And so they have kind of been forced to stop spending more. And that's, of course, what's going to happen to every industry. It cannot be true that industries are just growing R&D spending faster than revenue growth, because at some point, R&D spending will be bigger than revenue, and that's, of course, not sustainable. And you'll reach that point where you have to dial back quite a lot sooner, right? Maybe the limit is 25% of revenue, 30%. I don't know, but there is a limit. And pharmaceuticals hit that limit, so they had to shrink. At the same time, what you can see happening there, and that's really instructive to look at, is the way they are dealing with that reduced R&D budget is by boosting efficiency, outsourcing more. And that's exactly what you need to do when you're focusing on operational innovation and focusing on increasing R&D efficiency. You need to start looking at R&D automation and outsourcing part of your innovation, right? You need to look at R&D automation, data-enabled projects, and automated technology tracking to optimize cost and to look at efficiency metrics.
Great. Thanks for that. And I'm just looking at the time. So unfortunately, we won't have any more time to answer additional questions. But having said that, as I mentioned earlier, we will have an opportunity to answer all remaining questions after the webinar today. And thanks again, Arij, for your presentation today. So just a note for those of you who've attended, just a note for new attendees for today's webinar, and a reminder for those of you who've attended webinars in the past, the slides and recording from today's webinar will be sent to all of you via email today after the webinar. so you'll be able to refer to it after today as well. And one last thing before we conclude the webinar. After the webinar will close, you will be prompted to complete a survey. And as always, the Lux team would greatly appreciate any feedback you may have to help inform and improve future webinars. Excellent. That's it from our side. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a great day.